Let me ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly before we go any further. Have you ever looked at your bank account at the end of the month, not because something went wrong, not because you overspent on something careless, but just looked at it and felt like something still wasn't adding up? Like you did everything more or less right, and somehow the result still doesn't feel like control? If that sounds familiar, stay with me, because what I'm going to share in this video is not another budgeting framework, not a savings percentage you should be hitting, and not a list of habits that successful people follow before 6 a.m. What I want to do is show you something much more foundational than any of that. Something that, once you see it, will make almost every financial decision you've ever felt confused about suddenly make a different kind of sense. And if you stay until the end, I'll walk you through the 3 specific shifts that come directly out of understanding this one step. Shifts that don't require you to earn more, sacrifice more, or discipline yourself into a different person. So let's start from a place that might feel very familiar. You wake up, you go to work, or you log in, or you show up, however that looks for you, and you earn money. It comes in on a schedule. You know when to expect it. And when it arrives, you do what responsible people do. You pay your rent or your mortgage. You cover utilities, your phone, your subscriptions. You make sure the car payment goes through, the insurance is handled, the minimum on the card is paid at least, ideally more. Maybe you set a little aside for savings, not as much as you'd like, but something. You eat out less than you'd probably enjoy. You think twice before buying things you want. You are, by most reasonable definitions, trying. And yet, there is this persistent, low-level feeling that you are never quite ahead of it. That money is something happening to you, not something you are moving intentionally. That if something unexpected came along, a medical bill, a car repair, a shift in your income, you would feel it immediately. And not just financially. You would feel it in your chest, in your sleep, in the way you move through the next few weeks. That feeling is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you are irresponsible or that you lack the discipline that other people seem to have found. It is a signal that something structural is missing, not from your character, but from the foundation of how you were taught to think about money. Here is what most of us were given when it came to financial understanding. We were told to spend less than we earn. We were told to save a portion of our income. We were told that if we worked hard, earned well, and avoided obvious mistakes, things would work out. Some of us were told to invest, to build credit, to have an emergency fund. These are not wrong ideas, but they are all responses. They are all things to do. What almost no one taught us was how to see the system we were already operating inside. And that is the missing step. Not a habit, not a tool, not a mindset shift, a way of seeing. Financial control does not begin with earning more. It does not begin with saving more aggressively. It begins with understanding the structure of your own financial life, clearly, completely, and without judgment. What does that actually mean? It means knowing, at any given moment, not just how much money is coming in, but what that money is already committed to before you ever decide anything. It means seeing your income not as a resource you have, but as a resource that is already partially, sometimes almost entirely, spoken for by obligations you agreed to at different points in time, under different circumstances, with different expectations about the future. Most people, when they think about their finances, think in terms of what they earn and what they spend. But that framing leaves out something critical: the difference between spending that is flexible and spending that is fixed, between money you choose to use and money that is already allocated the moment it arrives, between obligations and decisions. Your rent is not a decision you make each month. Your loan payment is not optional. Your insurance premiums, your phone contract, Your subscriptions that auto-renew, these are all prior commitments running in the background of your financial life, regardless of what else is happening. And when you add all of those up and hold them against your income, what you are left with is not your wealth. It is your actual room to breathe. And for most people, that room is much smaller than they expected. Not because they did something wrong, but because they built their financial life incrementally, one obligation at a time, without ever stepping back to see the full picture of what they had constructed. That is where the pressure lives. Not in what you spend at the coffee shop, not in the dinner out, in the weight of fixed obligations stacked against a single, often fragile income stream. When you don't see that structure clearly, you can't feel where the pressure is actually coming from. You only feel the pressure itself, diffuse, unexplained, and easy to interpret as personal failure. The anxiety you feel around money is, in large part, the experience of operating inside a system you cannot fully see. Clarity is not a luxury in that situation. It is the actual intervention. Here is why most people miss this step, and why that's completely understandable. We are taught, culturally and socially, to measure financial success through income. A raise feels like progress. A higher salary feels like arrival. The conversation around money, in families, in media, in the way we compare ourselves to others, is almost entirely focused on what comes in, not on the structure of what exists. And so, we pursue the thing we are taught to pursue, which is more income, without ever examining whether the structure underneath that income is designed to actually hold what we're building. There is also the way progress gets measured. We look at peers, at social media, at the visible markers of how other people seem to be doing. But what we're seeing is rarely the full picture. We're seeing outcomes without seeing the underlying structures that produced them, or the pressures those structures might be hiding. Comparing your experience to someone else's visible life without knowing anything about their fixed obligations, their family support, their inheritance, their debt load, their actual financial pressure, that comparison produces nothing useful. It only produces a distorted sense of where you stand. And then there is the simple absence of education. Most people were never taught to map their financial structure. Not in school, not at home, not in the standard financial advice they encountered as adults. The advice they received was behavioral, spend less, save more, without the structural understanding that would make that advice actually land somewhere meaningful. When you add all of that together, you get a very predictable pattern. People try to fix the feeling of financial stress by attacking symptoms. They cut small expenses. They try harder to save. They tell themselves that if they could just earn a bit more, things would finally stabilize. And sometimes those things help at the margins. But the core experience, the sense of not quite being in control, persists because the structure underneath has not been examined. Trying to fix financial stress without understanding your structure is like trying to fix a recurring leak by mopping the floor. The effort is real. The result just keeps coming back. There are 3 specific patterns that tend to repeat here. The first is focusing on small expenses when the real pressure is in fixed obligations that were never scrutinized. The second is seeking higher income as the primary solution, without recognizing that more income flowing into the same structure often just expands that structure rather than creating freedom. Lifestyle adjusts. New obligations appear. The breathing room stays thin. The third pattern is measuring your situation against other people's situations without any of the context that would make that comparison meaningful. The shift that changes things is not dramatic. It does not require a financial overhaul or a complete lifestyle change. The first shift is simply this. Map your structure. Write down every fixed obligation, every recurring commitment. Hold that against your income and find out clearly what your actual room to move is before decisions, before lifestyle, before anything optional. Most people have never done this in a complete and honest way. When they do, it is rarely comfortable, but it is almost always clarifying. The second shift is to look at your fixed obligations not as permanent facts, but as choices made at earlier moments. Some of them may no longer serve your current situation. Some of them may be reducible. Not all of them, but some. And finding even one or two places where fixed pressure can be reduced does more for your actual financial experience than months of disciplined small-scale saving. The third shift is to stop building toward a perfect financial picture and start building toward flexibility. Flexibility is the real asset in a financial life. The ability to absorb disruption, to respond to opportunity, to make choices rather than just react to circumstances. Perfection is not the goal. Flexibility is. It is worth acknowledging that some people move through their financial lives without encountering this gap. People who grew up in environments where these structural conversations happen naturally, where financial mentorship was present, where the foundation was laid before it was ever needed, those people often develop a kind of intuitive clarity around money that looks, from the outside, like discipline or talent. It is rarely that. It is mostly exposure. It is having been shown the right things early enough that the understanding became automatic. If that was not your experience, that is not a reflection of your ability to understand it now. What I want you to take from this is not a task. It is a realization. Financial control is not about doing more things correctly. It is about seeing clearly what you are already doing and understanding the structure underneath it well enough to make intentional adjustments. The pressure you feel around money is largely the pressure of operating without that visibility. And the moment you begin to see your financial life structurally, not as a performance you're either passing or failing, but as a system with its own logic that can be understood and adjusted, that is the moment control becomes available to you. Not because you changed who you are, but because you finally saw what you were working with